Section 14, paragraph C, subsection 3, Brenda said, her voice cutting through the heavy, stagnant July air like a two-stroke weed whacker firing up on a Sunday morning. No unauthorized wildlife sustenance mechanisms. I just stared at her. Let me paint the picture for you. It was 8:15 a.m. in Cary, North Carolina. If you've never been to Cary in the middle of July, let me explain the atmosphere. It is less like breathing air and more like inhaling warm soup. The humidity was already sitting at a comfortable 94%. The sky was that hazy, washed-out white blue that promises afternoon thunderstorms, and the cicadas were already humming in the trees like high-voltage power lines. I was standing on my front porch, wearing a faded t-shirt and gym shorts, holding a mug of dark roast coffee that I desperately needed to wake up. Standing at the bottom of my porch steps, blocking my path to the driveway, was Brenda. Brenda is the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. And when I say president, I don't mean she volunteers to coordinate the neighborhood block party. I mean she rules this subdivision of 400 identical vinyl-sided homes with an iron fist, a retractable measuring tape, and a terrifyingly encyclopedic knowledge of the bylaws. She was wearing a crisp white polo shirt, khaki capri pants that did not have a single wrinkle, spotless white tennis shoes, and a visor that said, "Golf Life." She did not play golf. She was clutching a neon pink citation slip in her left hand and a silver clipboard in her right. She stood with that aggressive, wide-stanced posture of someone who is perpetually preparing to ask a retail worker for their regional manager's direct phone number. I looked from Brenda's perfectly manicured fingernail tapping on the pink slip, and then I slowly traced her line of sight up into the sprawling 80-year-old oak tree that dominated my front yard. Hanging from a sturdy lower branch, swaying gently in the non-existent breeze, was a bird feeder. It was a standard cylinder-shaped plastic tube. I bought it at Target for $24.99. It had a little decorative copper-painted plastic roof. Inside the tube were maybe 2 or 3 cups of black oil sunflower seeds. And currently clinging to one of the tiny plastic perches was a single, spectacularly oblivious blue jay. He was hammering away at a sunflower seed, completely unaware that his breakfast was currently the subject of a major suburban legal dispute. "Brenda," I said, my voice thick with sleep and genuine confusion. I leaned my shoulder against the doorframe, trying to find a comfortable way to have this conversation. "It's a bird feeder. Literally just a bird feeder. I got it on clearance." "It is an unauthorized wildlife sustenance mechanism," she repeated. She didn't blink. "I swear I have lived in this neighborhood for 4 years, and I have never actually seen Brenda blink. And it is currently attracting pests to the community airspace." "The blue jay?" I asked, pointing a thumb at the bird. The jay cracked a seed, dropped the shell onto my lawn, and chirped happily. "And squirrels," she snapped, whipping out her retractable measuring tape and pointing the metal casing at me like it was a loaded weapon. "I saw a gray squirrel on this property line not 20 minutes ago during my morning patrol. You are deliberately baiting them into a residential zone. The fine for violating Section 14 is $500, payable to the HOA escrow account by the 1st of the month. You are required to remove the mechanism immediately." I took a deep, slow breath, letting the thick humidity fill my lungs. I could have argued. I really could have. I could have pointed out that squirrels live outside, that trees are their natural habitat, that we carved a massive housing development out of a dense pine forest, and maybe, just maybe, the local wildlife hadn't gotten the memo about the property lines. But you don't argue with a Brenda. You just don't. Have you ever tried to teach advanced algebra to a malfunctioning lawnmower? No? Because it's loud, it's entirely pointless, and you're probably going to walk away with a headache. Arguing with an HOA president who has weaponized her free time is a zero-sum game. Fine, I said, holding up my free hand in a gesture of mock surrender. I took a sip of my coffee. It was suddenly tasting very bitter. I will take down the unauthorized wildlife sustenance mechanism. I will personally inform the Blue Jay that he has been evicted from Whispering Pines. Will that satisfy the board? For now, she said. She marched up the 3 wooden steps of my porch, invading my personal space, and shoved the pink slip directly against my chest. I instinctively took it. The paper was so thick it felt like it was made of actual plastic. It was a formal citation, completely filled out with my address, the date, and a meticulously detailed description of my infraction. "But we need to talk about that tree," Brenda added, her voice dropping an octave. I paused. My hand was resting on the handle of my screen door, ready to retreat into the glorious, air-conditioned safety of my living room. I looked back at her. "My oak tree?" I asked cautiously. "It's on the shared property line," Brenda said smoothly. Her lips thinned into a hard, unforgiving line. "And it drops an unacceptable volume of leaves all over the community sidewalk every single autumn. It's a severe slipping hazard for the elderly residents. It's an eyesore. And frankly, its root system is aggressive and threatens the structural integrity of the curbs." She reached under the pink slip on her clipboard and pulled out a second piece of paper. This one wasn't pink. This one was white, printed on heavy stock paper, complete with the official Whispering Pines Homeowners Association letterhead, a little embossed graphic of 2 pine trees crossed over a picket fence. She didn't hand this one to me. She slapped it directly onto the glass of my screen door with a piece of painter's tape she must have had waiting in her pocket. "What is this?" I asked, my heart doing a slow, heavy, incredibly uncomfortable thump against my ribs. "Notice of removal," Brenda said. And then she smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It wasn't a polite, neighborly smile. It was the smile of a great white shark that had just cornered a wounded seal in a shallow reef. It was the smile of absolute, terrifying suburban victory. "The board took a vote last night during the emergency executive session," Brenda continued, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "The HOA has contracted Timberrite Tree Services. They are a fully licensed and bonded commercial landscaping company. They will be here on August 15th at 8 in the morning to grind that nuisance down to the stump. And per the bylaws regarding shared zone landscaping remediation, you will be billed for exactly 50% of the commercial removal cost. It will be added to your quarterly dues." I stood there, frozen. I was genuinely stunned. The coffee mug in my hand felt incredibly heavy. "You're going to chop down an 80-year-old, fully mature, perfectly healthy oak tree?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because leaves fall on the sidewalk in autumn? The season literally famous for leaves falling? We are maintaining the aesthetic integrity and safety standards of Whispering Pines," Brenda said. She tapped her clipboard with a shiny silver pen. "Have the seed feeder down by noon, and don't bother submitting an appeal for the tree to the architectural committee. The executive vote was unanimous." She didn't wait for a response. She turned on her heel, marched back down the porch steps, and proceeded to stride down my driveway. Her pristine white tennis shoes scuffed against the asphalt with a rhythmic, military-style crunch, crunch, crunch. I stood on the porch in the suffocating heat, watching her walk down the street until she turned the corner at the end of the cul-de-sac. I looked down at the laminated pink slip in my hand. $500 for feeding a bird. Then I looked up at the white notice taped to my door. Timberrite Tree Services. Complete removal and stump grinding. August 15th. Finally, I stepped off the porch and walked onto my front lawn. I tilted my head back and looked up into the canopy of the oak tree. This tree wasn't just a piece of wood. It was an absolute titan. Its trunk was wider than my dining room table. Its branches stretched out like massive, protective arms, casting a deep, glorious, cooling shade over the entire front half of my house. In the brutal North Carolina summers, That tree was the only reason my HVAC system didn't spontaneously combust. It kept my electricity bill under $300 a month. It was home to countless songbirds, the occasional resting hawk, and yes, Brenda, a few squirrels. It had been growing on this exact spot of dirt since the 1940s, long before the Whispering Pines subdivision was even a glimmer in some greedy real estate developer's eye. Long before Brenda had ever picked up a clipboard, and they wanted to grind it into sawdust because of some stray leaves on a concrete sidewalk. I felt a hot, sharp spike of adrenaline hit my bloodstream. It started in my chest and shot straight down to my fingertips. "Are we really doing this, Brenda?" I crumpled the $500 pink slip into a tight ball in my right fist. I stared at the spot where her white Lexus was usually parked. "Oh, we are doing this. We are absolutely doing this." I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. My house was completely silent, save for the low, rhythmic hum of the air conditioner and the frantic, aggressive clacking of my mechanical keyboard. I was sitting at my kitchen island in the dark, bathed in the harsh blue-white glow of my laptop screen. I was surrounded by empty mugs of cold brew coffee, a half-eaten sleeve of saltine crackers, and a yellow legal pad covered in frantic, scribbled notes. Normal people, when faced with an HOA mandate, would hire a local real estate lawyer. They would pay a retainer fee, draft a strongly worded cease and desist letter, and hope the board backed down. Or they would go to the next open HOA meeting, stand up at the podium, and beg for mercy in front of their neighbors. I am not normal. I am petty. I am resourceful. I am hyper-fixated when I am wronged. And most importantly, I have a gigabit internet connection and a burning, deep-seated hatred for neighborhood dictators who abuse tiny amounts of localized power. I knew a local lawyer wouldn't work. The Whispering Pines bylaws were a nightmare labyrinth of legal jargon, written specifically to protect the board from liability. The shared zone landscaping clause was ironclad. Brenda had successfully weaponized the neighborhood rules. To beat her, I couldn't just use local municipal codes. A city ordinance wouldn't save my tree. I had to go bigger. I needed state law. No, wait. I needed federal law. At 1:14 a.m., I was reading up on the Department of Agriculture's regulations regarding soil erosion. Dead end. My yard was too flat. At 2:30 a.m., I was deep into an Environmental Protection Agency PDF about neighborhood runoff and watershed preservation. Another dead end. Cary's drainage system was already fully compliant. At 3:45 a.m., my eyes were burning, my vision was blurring, and I was dangerously close to giving up and buying 50 feet of heavy-duty logging chain to physically anchor myself to the trunk of the oak. And then, at 4:02 a.m., I hit the absolute motherlode. I had been frantically Googling laws regarding the destruction of natural habitats, which led me to a Wikipedia page about the Audubon Society, which linked out to a Cornell University ornithology database, which finally linked me directly to the official government portal for the United States Code. Specifically, 16 USC, before 703-712. I leaned closer to the screen. I bumped my empty coffee mug, nearly knocking it off the counter. I ignored it. I highlighted the text with my cursor and read it out loud to my empty kitchen, my voice raspy and dry. It is unlawful at any time, by any means or in any manner, to pursue, hunt, take, capture, kill, attempt to take, capture, or kill, possess, offer for sale, sell, offer to barter, barter, offer to purchase, purchase, deliver for shipment, ship, export, import, cause to be shipped, exported, or imported, deliver for transportation, transport or cause to be transported, carry or cause to be carried, or receive for shipment, transportation, carriage, or export, any migratory bird, any part, nest, or egg of any such bird. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes hard until I saw static, then opened them and read the paragraph again. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918. It is a federal crime. Not a city ordinance, not a state fine. A federal offense investigated by federal agents carrying potential prison time and massive financial penalties to disturb, destroy, move, or otherwise mess with an active nest of a native protected species. A slow, wicked, entirely unhinged grin began to spread across my face. Brenda wanted to complain about an unauthorized wildlife sustenance mechanism? Brenda wanted to fine me for feeding a blue jay? Fine. I'll give her wildlife. I will give her the most heavily protected wildlife on the North American continent. But I couldn't just rely on any random bird. A robin's nest is too small, easily hidden, and usually abandoned quickly. A cardinal's nest is too fragile, built out of twigs that a strong wind could knock down. If I was going to legally halt a fully contracted commercial tree removal crew in their tracks, I needed something undeniably visible. I needed an absolute fortress. I needed a federally protected apex predator to take up residence on my property line. I needed an owl. The research consumed the rest of the early morning hours. By 6 p.m., the sun was starting to peek over the roofs of the neighborhood, and my legal pad was a chaotic mess of crossed-out ideas and frantic bullet points. Let me walk you through the options I considered to weaponize my yard, and why most of them failed. Training an endangered red cockaded woodpecker to live in the tree? Pros: extremely endangered, highly protected. Cons: way too hard to find. Also, incredibly illegal to trap and transport an endangered species. I would go to federal prison before Brenda did, spraying the entire tree trunk with synthetic skunk pheromones so the tree crew physically cannot approach it. Pros: hilarious, highly effective deterrent. Cons: unbelievably smelly. The wind blows toward my house. I would effectively evict myself. Building a heavily fortified premium luxury owl nesting box specifically engineered to attract an eastern screech owl? Pros: completely legal to build. Screech owls are native to North Carolina. They are strictly protected under the MBTA. Cons: none. It was absolute perfection. Here is what you need to know about eastern screech owls. They don't build their own nests. They are cavity nesters. They look for hollowed-out dead trees or abandoned woodpecker holes. Because real estate is tough in manicured suburbs like Whispering Pines, they will enthusiastically move into a man-made wooden box if it meets their exact, specific criteria. And once a female owl moves into that box and lays a single egg, that tree legally ceases to be a piece of neighborhood landscaping. It instantly transforms into a protected federal wildlife sanctuary. The HOA bylaws wouldn't just be void, they would be actively criminal to enforce. At exactly 9 a.m., the moment government offices opened, I picked up my phone. I didn't call the HOA. I didn't call a lawyer. I called the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. I needed to be absolutely, 100% certain that my interpretation of the law was bulletproof. The phone rang 3 times before it was picked up. Wildlife Resources Commission, District 3, this is Agent Miller. A deep, gruff voice answered. "Hi, Agent Miller," I said. I immediately shifted my posture, adopting my best, most innocent, nature-loving, suburban citizen voice. "I am so sorry to bother you this morning. I have a quick question. I'm a huge bird enthusiast, and I'm planning on putting up a conservation owl box in my front yard." "All right," Agent Miller said slowly. "Nothing wrong with that. Good for the local ecosystem." "Well, here is my concern," I continued, sounding appropriately anxious. "I live in a very strict homeowners association, and there is a rumor that they might try to cut down the oak tree on my property line. If I have an owl box up there, and an owl actually moves in and lays eggs, what happens if my HOA tries to take the tree down while they are nesting? Is there any protection for the birds? I'm just terrified for them." Agent Miller chuckled. It wasn't a warm chuckle. It was a dark, amused, slightly dangerous sound. "Son," Miller said, his voice dropping into a serious, official cadence, "if you have an active eastern screech owl nest in that tree, and somebody takes a chainsaw to the trunk, that is a direct violation of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. It's a federal misdemeanor. I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter. Really? Even if the HOA board formally voted on the removal? Federal law trumps a neighborhood book club, buddy, Miller said dryly. The MBTA supersedes any local ordinance or civil contract. If they knowingly disturb an active nest, kill a bird, or destroy an egg, it is a fine of up to $15,000 per egg, plus potential jail time. We take it very seriously. Wow, I breathed, barely having to fake my shock. That is amazing. What should I do if they show up with chainsaws? You get a tenant in that box, you monitor it, Agent Miller instructed. If they start setting up equipment, you let them know the tree is protected. If they touch it anyway, you call us immediately. We will have a warden out there faster than they can grind a stump. Thank you, Agent Miller, I said earnestly. You've been incredibly helpful. Good luck with the box, he said, and hung up. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear. I looked out the kitchen window, through the living room, and out to the front yard. The massive oak tree stood there, completely unaware of the absolute legal warfare it was about to host. It wasn't just a tree anymore. It was bait. It was a trap. I looked at the calendar on my fridge. August 15th. I had exactly 3 weeks to build a luxury bird condominium, mount it 20 feet in the air, attract a wild apex predator, and convince her to start a family. The game was officially on. Honestly, finding a contractor who won't ask too many questions is like a skill you really don't realize you need until you're trying to rapidly build a federal wildlife trap in your front yard. I mean, you can't exactly put an ad on Craigslist or the local Facebook community page that says, "Looking for a discreet carpenter to help me spite my HOA president with bird law." I spent the entire next morning making phone calls. I mean, honestly, calling contractors in Cary, North Carolina, in the middle of peak summer landscaping season is literally a nightmare. The first guy I called hung up on me the second I told him I needed the project started by tomorrow afternoon. The second guy quoted me $1,200 just to drive his truck out and look at the tree. The third guy, a high-end landscape architect, told me my vision for an untreated wooden box didn't align with the subdivision's cohesive aesthetic profile, which I guess is just fancy contractor speak for Brenda already sent an email warning all the local vendors about you. Eventually, I had to dig deep into the darkest pages of a local community forum. That is where I found Tony. Everyone in my zip code apparently called him Two Boards. Tony, because rumor had it he could frame an entire residential house with just a rusty hammer, some galvanized nails, and exactly 2 boards of wood. I guess that was supposed to be a compliment regarding his efficiency. Anyway, I called the number, offered to pay in cash, and Tony pulled into my driveway the very next morning in a battered, rust-eaten Ford F-150 that looked like it had survived the actual apocalypse. It was missing a hubcap, the tailgate was held shut by a neon-orange bungee cord, and the exhaust pipe rattled like a coffee can full of marbles. Tony stepped out of the truck, chewing on a splintered wooden toothpick. He was wearing a faded brown Carhartt shirt covered in sawdust, and he had the thick, leathery tan of a man who hasn't worked indoors since the late 90s. "You the guy who called about the box?" Tony asked, leaning against the side of his truck. His voice sounded like gravel rolling around inside a cement mixer. "That's me," I said, walking out to meet him. The humidity was already brutal, but I was too energized by pure spite to care. "I really appreciate you coming out on such short notice. Honestly, it's a bit of an emergency." Tony looked up at my house. Then his eyes drifted over to the sprawling oak tree. And then he looked back at me. "Lady on the phone, my dispatcher, who is also my wife, she said you wanted a box, like a planter box, a custom mailbox, a deck storage box, because if you want a deck box, buddy, I charge extra for the heavy-duty hinges. I don't mess around with cheap hardware." "It's not a deck box, Tony," I said, looking around to make sure the street was relatively empty. "It's a bird box." Tony stopped chewing his toothpick. He just stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. "A bird box," he repeated flatly. "Like a birdhouse? Buddy, I build massive cedar pergolas. I pour reinforced concrete foundations. I frame load-bearing walls. I don't do arts and crafts. Go down to Home Depot, buy one of those little painted wooden things with a sunflower on it for $10 and hang it on a nail. Call it a day. I mean, I literally can't do that, I said, stepping closer and lowering my voice instinctively, even though Brenda was nowhere in sight. I pulled my heavily annotated legal pad out from under my arm. I don't need a birdhouse for a sparrow or a finch. I need a premium, heavily fortified architectural marvel of a nesting cavity. It needs to be made of untreated rough-cut cedar. It needs to be exactly 8 inches wide, 8 inches deep, and 15 inches high on the inside. It needs a 3-inch circular entry hole, adequate ventilation slots just under the roof, drainage holes drilled into the floor, and it has to be mounted 20 feet up that specific oak tree, with a massive sheet metal predator guard wrapped around the trunk so raccoons and snakes can't climb up. Tony took the toothpick out of his mouth and flicked it onto the grass. Are you trying to catch a pterodactyl? I am trying to attract a native eastern screech owl, Tony, and I'm willing to pay your full day rate, in cash, for 3 hours of work if you just build this exactly to my specifications, and don't ask any more questions. Tony looked at me. He looked at the massive oak tree. He looked at the crisp $100 bills I had strategically pulled halfway out of the pocket of my gym shorts. Rough-cut cedar, you said? Rough cut, I confirmed, tapping the legal pad. It needs maximum grip on the inside walls so the babies can eventually climb out when they fledge. Honestly, it has to be perfect. If it's not perfect, they won't move in. And if they don't move in, I lose the tree. For the next 3 hours, my suburban driveway was transformed into a high-end, heavily localized avian construction zone. The sharp, incredible smell of fresh-cut cedar hung in the thick summer air, mixing with the scent of Tony's cheap cigarettes. The guy was an absolute artist. He didn't just build a box, he built a miniature luxury condominium. He used expensive exterior-grade galvanized screws so they wouldn't rust in the North Carolina rain. He angled the roof perfectly to shed water, ensuring the interior cavity would stay completely bone dry during a hurricane. All right, the lid is on heavy-duty hinges so you can open it up and clean it out after the nesting season, Tony grunted, wiping a thick layer of sweat from his forehead with the back of his massive hand. He slapped the top of the wooden box proudly. Though, I personally wouldn't go sticking your bare hand in there if a literal raptor with razor blades for feet is living inside. But what do I know? Wait, hold on, I said, holding up a finger. Before you screw the roof down tight for the installation, I need to install the security system. I pulled a tiny, battery-powered Wyze camera out of my pocket. It was the outdoor model, equipped with high-definition night vision, motion sensors, and it was fully connected to my home Wi-Fi network. Tony just stared at the camera. He looked at me like I belonged in a psychiatric ward. You're bugging the birdhouse. You are literally wiring a birdhouse for surveillance. I have to monitor the tenants, Tony, I said, deadpan. It's crucial for the aesthetic integrity and security of the neighborhood. I grabbed my cordless drill and carefully mounted the little white cube high up in the back interior corner of the box, angling the wide lens straight down at the rough cedar floor of the cavity. I synced it to my phone right there in the driveway. A crystal-clear, high-definition view of the empty wooden box popped up on my phone screen. Incredible, I whispered, practically glowing with pride. You're a sick man, Tony said, shaking his head slowly. But I could see the corner of his mouth twitching. He was smiling. He respected the hustle. We were just hauling the heavy aluminum extension ladder over to the base of the oak tree when I heard the dreaded, unmistakable rhythmic crunch of pristine white tennis shoes on the pavement. Well, 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 a shrill voice called out. I didn't even have to turn around. I literally felt my blood pressure spike so hard I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Brenda was doing her mid-morning neighborhood patrol. She stood at the very edge of my driveway, hands firmly planted on her hips, her polarized sunglasses reflecting the glare of the sun. Her eyes darted rapidly between me, Tony, the extension ladder, and the massive, heavy wooden box resting on the grass. I see you took down the unauthorized wildlife mechanism, Brenda said, a smug, sickly sweet tone dripping from her voice. I suppose I should thank you for finally complying with the bylaws, though I must admit I'm terribly curious what this new, rather hideous pile of lumber is supposed to be. I stood up straight, pasting on the fakest, most aggressively cheerful smile I could physically muster. Oh, this. Good morning, Brenda. It's just a decorative box. A decorative box, she repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. She took a step onto my driveway, pointing her clipboard at the cedar structure. Are you planning on leaving it in the front yard? Because Bylaw 7.A strictly prohibits unapproved lawn ornaments exceeding 12 inches in height or width. That thing looks like a wooden mini-fridge. Nope, not a lawn ornament, lady, Tony chimed in. He tossed his hammer into his leather tool belt with a heavy metallic thud. He clearly did not like Brenda's tone. Gonna bolt it 20 feet up that oak tree. Brenda let out a sharp, mocking laugh that sounded like a seagull choking on a French fry. You're mounting a box to the tree? The exact same tree that Timber-Right Tree Services is coming to grind into absolute sawdust in exactly 21 days? Honestly, you are just throwing your money away. That tree is coming down. The HOA has already paid the non-refundable deposit. I guess we'll see about that, Brenda, I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. I guess we will, she shot back, gripping her clipboard tighter. Enjoy your little amateur carpentry project. Just make sure the sawdust and debris are completely swept up by 5 o'clock. We don't want the neighborhood looking like an industrial construction site. And keep your vehicles off the street. Street parking is a violation. She turned on her heel and marched away, continuing her patrol to go harass someone about the length of their grass. Tony watched her go, then casually spit a piece of sawdust onto the asphalt of the driveway. I don't know what kind of neighborhood war you're fighting here, buddy, but I sincerely hope you win. That woman is a nightmare. Me too, Tony, I said, grabbing the base of the ladder. Me too. Now let's get this thing in the air. By noon, the box was securely mounted high in the dense canopy of the oak tree. Tony had bolted it perfectly to a thick, sturdy trunk section, facing south, so it would catch the ambient warmth of the winter sun, but heavily shaded by leaves, so it would stay cool in the brutal summer heat. To top it off, Tony had wrapped a massive, 3-foot-wide cylinder of slippery sheet metal completely around the base of the trunk. A predator guard that made the majestic oak tree look like it was wearing a cheap tin necklace. It was perfect. It was a fortress. I paid Tony his cash, shook his hand, and watched his loud, rattling truck disappear down the street. But building the trap was only step one. Now came the absolute worst part of this entire psychotic endeavor. The waiting. You can't exactly force a wild apex predator to move into a man-made box. You just have to hope the local woodland real estate market is incredibly tight. But I wasn't going to just sit around and leave it entirely to chance. I mean, if I was going to beat Brenda and save my tree, I had to play dirty. I had to actively solicit the wildlife. That night, at exactly 9 p.m., when the sun finally set and the neighborhood got quiet, I carried a heavy, waterproof Bluetooth speaker out to my front porch. I hid it carefully behind a large potted fern so nobody walking by could see it. I opened my phone, opened the Spotify app, and clicked on a custom playlist I had created titled, simply, Operation Hoot. I cranked the volume to maximum and hit play. A soft, trembling, almost ghostly whinny echoed across my front lawn. Hoo, ho, 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 ho. If you have never heard an eastern screech owl, let me clarify something. It does not sound like the classic deep hoot you hear in scary movies. It sounds more like a tiny, vibrating hoarse ghost crying softly in the dark. It is eerie. It is strange. It is slightly unsettling, and it carries for blocks. I sat on the porch in the pitch dark, sipping a cheap domestic beer, playing the mating call on a continuous loop every 15 minutes. I did this for 5 nights straight. I literally felt like a complete lunatic. My next-door neighbor, a retired guy named Phil, who spent most of his time collecting vintage license plates in his garage, came outside on the third night. He was wearing his bathrobe and holding a heavy maglite flashlight, shining the beam frantically up into the trees. "Hey, you hear that?" Phil yelled over the wooden privacy fence, looking genuinely panicked. "Sounds like a demon horse or something. I think a coyote got a foal." "Yeah, crazy wildlife around here lately, Phil," I called back cheerfully, quickly muting the Bluetooth speaker from my phone. "Must be the season. Better stay inside and lock the doors." A full week went by. Nothing. The Wise app on my phone remained a depressing, static, unchanging image of an empty cedar floor. The tree removal date was creeping closer like an impending doom. Brenda had already stuck another passive-aggressive notice on my door, a friendly reminder to clear all my personal vehicles from the driveway on the morning of August 15th, to make room for the massive wood chipper. Every time I saw her driving her Lexus through the neighborhood, she would slow down as she passed my house, looking at the oak tree with a smug, victorious grin. I was starting to panic. What if the owls didn't like the smell of the cedar? What if Tony had accidentally made the entry hole a quarter of an inch too small? What if Brenda's sheer, concentrated negative energy was acting as a supernatural repellent for local wildlife? It was day 12, a Tuesday. I was sitting at my kitchen island at 11:45 p.m., eating a slice of cold leftover pepperoni pizza in the dark, questioning every single life choice that had led me to this bizarre moment. I was just about to give up. I was literally opening a new tab on my laptop to look into the legality of chaining myself to the trunk of the tree on removal day. And then, my phone buzzed on the granite counter. It wasn't a text message. It was a push notification. Wise Cam. Motion detected at Bird Fortress. My heart stopped. I mean, it literally just stopped beating in my chest for a full, terrifying second. I dropped my pizza crust onto the plate. My hands were actually shaking with adrenaline as I picked up the phone. I tapped the notification. The app loaded. The little spinning circle of buffering appeared on the screen. It felt like it took 3 entire years to load. Then, the live feed popped up. The infrared night vision bathed the inside of the rough-cut cedar box in a stark, glowing greenish-black light. For a split second, I didn't see anything. The box looked empty, but then, a dark shadow shifted rapidly in the back corner. 2 massive, glowing, perfectly round yellow eyes blinked directly at the camera lens. I slapped a hand over my mouth to keep from screaming out loud and waking up my neighbors. It was a bird, but it wasn't just a bird. It was a beautiful, terrifying, heavily feathered ball of federal protection. It had little tufts of feathers on the top of its head that looked like devil horns. It swiveled its head almost completely around, inspecting the cedar walls, staring at the camera with a look of absolute, unapologetic, predatory judgment. "Yes," I whispered to the empty kitchen, pumping my fist in the air. "Yes, yes, yes. Welcome to Whispering Pines, buddy." I stayed up for the next 4 hours, completely glued to the live feed. The owl, I decided right then and there to name him Justice, flew in and out of the box a few times. He brought in a large dead moth. Then, an hour later, he brought in a massive green beetle. He was inspecting the property. He was checking the structural integrity. But justice wasn't the ultimate prize. A male owl checking out a box is great, but it doesn't trigger the highest levels of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. I didn't just need a male. I needed a nest. I needed eggs. 3 agonizing, nerve-wracking days later, on a Friday morning while I was pretending to work on my laptop in the living room, I got another notification. I immediately opened the app. Justice wasn't there. Instead, there was a slightly larger owl. She was hunkered down low in the back corner of the cedar box, aggressively fluffing her feathers to make herself look wider. She didn't move. She didn't fly in and out. She just sat there, looking remarkably cozy and fiercely territorial in the rough-cut cedar. I watched her for 2 solid days. She barely left the box. On Sunday afternoon, she finally stood up to stretch her wings, and accept a freshly caught, very dead mouse that Justice had dropped off for her at the entry hole. And as she stood up, the camera caught it perfectly. There they were, resting right on the bare cedar floor, glowing stark, brilliant white in the high-definition camera feed, were 3 perfectly round, beautiful little eggs. I stared at the screen, a slow, entirely unhinged smile spreading across my face. I took a screenshot. I took 5 screenshots. I saved the video clip directly to my camera roll. I backed the video up to my cloud storage. I emailed the files to my personal account, my work account, and a backup flash drive just in case. The trap was officially armed. The Federal Wildlife Sanctuary was active, occupied, and legally binding. I walked over to the kitchen and looked at the dry erase calendar on my fridge. August 15th was exactly 5 days away. The HOA's commercial tree removal crew was coming. Brenda was coming. They were bringing massive diesel trucks, heavily modified chainsaws, a terrifying stump grinder, and an absolute, arrogant certainty that they had won this war. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, walked out to my front porch, and looked up at the mighty oak tree. The metal predator guard glinted brightly in the mid-morning sun. You couldn't even see the cedar box hidden up in the dense green leaves. "Bring it on, Brenda," I muttered, taking a long sip of coffee. "Let's see how your little neighborhood bylaws hold up against the United States federal government." August 15th arrived with the kind of oppressive, suffocating heat that makes you question why human beings ever bothered to settle in the state of North Carolina. By 7 a.m., the air was already so thick with humidity you could practically swim through it. The cicadas were screaming in the trees, a relentless, deafening hum that felt like the perfect soundtrack for the suburban warfare that was about to unfold. I was out on my front porch exactly at 7:15 a.m. I was sitting in my favorite wooden rocking chair, wearing a clean pair of khaki shorts and a polo shirt. I wanted to look respectable. I wanted to look completely, reasonably unbothered. I had a massive mug of black coffee in my right hand, and my phone resting face up on my left knee. The Wise app was open and running, streaming a crystal-clear, live, high-definition feed of the interior of the cedar box. My girl, Liberty, was fluffed up to maximum capacity, looking like a heavily armored, very angry feather duster. She was completely immovable, sitting fiercely on top of those 3 glowing white eggs. I mean, she was literally the perfect federal agent, and she was working entirely for free. At exactly 7:45 a.m., the relative peace of the morning was violently shattered. It started with the screech of heavy air brakes, followed by the deep, rattling rumble of heavy-duty diesel engines. The ground actually vibrated beneath my rocking chair. I watched a massive, militaristic convoy turn slowly onto my quiet cul-de-sac. First came a gigantic, bright yellow cherry picker truck, the kind they use to clear power lines after a hurricane. Behind it was a massive, heavy-duty Ford F-450 pickup truck hauling a commercial wood chipper that looked large enough to easily swallow a Honda Civic whole. And leading the parade, driving at a triumphant 5 miles per hour like a conquering general riding into a vanquished city? Brenda. She was driving her pristine, pearl-white Lexus SUV. She parked it aggressively at the exact edge of the property line, angling it so her front bumper was technically blocking a foot of my driveway. I guess she wanted to make sure I couldn't make a run for it in my car. Not that I was going anywhere. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. Honestly, I was vibrating with so much anticipation, it took everything in my physical power not to start cackling like a comic book supervillain right there on the porch. The heavy trucks hissed to a stop, taking up half the street. 4 contractors piled out of the cabs. They were all wearing matching neon orange safety vests, heavy leather work boots, and hard hats with the Timber Right Tree Services logo plastered on the side. The foreman of the crew was a massive, burly guy with a thick red beard, mirrored sunglasses, and forearms covered in faded tribal tattoos. He looked like he ate pine cones for breakfast. He walked around to the side of the truck, grabbed a silver aluminum clipboard, and hoisted a terrifyingly large style chainsaw onto his shoulder. It looked like it weighed 40 pounds. Brenda practically sprinted out of her Lexus, her sensible heels clicking aggressively against the asphalt. She was holding her own clipboard, naturally. She marched right past my driveway, ignoring me entirely, and walked straight up to the foreman. She pointed a perfectly manicured, rigid finger directly at the trunk of my beautiful 80-year-old oak tree. "That's the one," Brenda said. She projected her shrill voice so loudly I could hear every single syllable perfectly from 50 feet away. "Grind it down all the way to the roots. I don't want a stump left. I want it completely flush with the grass. And make sure your men sweep up every single leaf and wood chip from the community sidewalk when you're done. We have an aesthetic standard to maintain." The foreman, let's just call him Mike, nodded slowly. He pushed his mirrored sunglasses up his nose and looked up into the massive, sprawling canopy of the tree, assessing the thickest branches. "All right, lady," Mike rumbled, his voice deep and raspy. "It's a big boy, but we'll start from the top with the bucket truck and section it down piece by piece. It's going to be loud, though, and we're going to need to drop some heavy limbs right near the property line." "That is perfectly fine," Brenda said loudly, turning her head for the first time to look directly at me sitting on the porch. She gave me a smug, razor-thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Some temporary noise and disruption is absolutely necessary for the long-term aesthetic improvement and safety of the community. It's for the greater good." Mike adjusted the massive chainsaw on his shoulder, unhooked a thick yellow safety rope from his belt, and started walking heavily across my front lawn. Showtime. I carefully set my coffee mug down on the small wicker table next to my rocking chair. I stood up, stretched my legs casually, and walked slowly down the porch steps. I didn't rush. I didn't look angry. I strolled over and planted myself directly in Mike's path, standing exactly between him and the trunk of the tree. "Morning, guys," I said cheerfully, flashing a bright, friendly smile. "Beautiful, humid day for some landscaping, honestly." Mike stopped in his tracks, looking completely confused. He lowered the heavy chainsaw, resting the blade guard against the grass. Morning, sir. You the homeowner?" "I am," I said, crossing my arms casually. "And I'm just coming out here to give you a friendly, neighborly heads up that you literally cannot touch this tree." Brenda let out a sharp, dramatic gasp. She practically teleported across the lawn, inserting herself forcefully between me and the foreman. "Do not listen to him, Mike," Brenda shouted, her face instantly flushing red. "The HOA owns the legal easement rights to this property line. We have a signed, legally binding contract with your company. The board authorized this removal. He is just throwing a childish tantrum because he doesn't respect the neighborhood bylaws. Turn on the saw and get to work." Mike looked from Brenda's furious face to my perfectly calm one, and then back to Brenda. He sighed heavily. He clearly just wanted to cut down a tree and get paid. He didn't want to be in the middle of an unhinged suburban soap opera. "Look, buddy," Mike said, his voice taking on a low, serious warning tone. He shifted his weight. "I got a signed work order in my truck. I got a 4-man crew on the clock. If you have a beef with the Homeowners Association, you need to take it up with her in a courtroom or a board meeting. But I gotta do my job, and my job is turning that oak tree into mulch, so I need you to step aside, or somebody is gonna get hurt." "I totally get it, Mike. I really, truly do," I said, holding both my hands up peacefully, palms facing outward. "I know you're just a contractor doing a job, but I'm not standing here because of the HOA bylaws. I don't care about the easement rights right now. I'm standing here because if you pull the starter cord on that chainsaw, you are personally, legally committing a federal crime. And I really, really don't want to see a hard-working guy like you go to federal prison over a neighborhood sidewalk dispute." Mike froze entirely. The other 3 guys on his crew, who had been pulling heavy rigging ropes and climbing harnesses out of the back of the Ford truck, stopped what they were doing and looked over at us. "Excuse me?" Mike said, his thick red eyebrows pulling together in utter confusion. Brenda literally shrieked. It was a high, piercing sound that made the blue jays scatter from the nearby bushes. "He is lying! He is a pathological liar and a nuisance to this community, she screamed, pointing her clipboard at my face. Mike, I am ordering you as the president of Whispering Pines to cut down this tree right this exact second. If you don't start the saw, I will cancel the contract, refuse to pay your invoice, and I will leave terrible reviews on every single business website your company is listed on. I didn't even flinch. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Mike. Mike, I am dead serious, I said, dropping my voice to a calm, deadpan level. Look at me. Do not touch the tree. Brenda whipped her cell phone out of the pocket of her pristine capri pants. Her hands were actually shaking with rage. She was completely losing control of the situation. That is it! I am calling the police! She yelled, jabbing her manicured thumb against the screen. You are deliberately disturbing the peace, you are interfering with a contracted commercial vendor, and you are harassing an elected HOA official. I am pressing charges. She hit the dial button and started speed-walking in tight, frantic circles on my front lawn, holding the phone to her ear. Yes, 911? Hello? I need police officers dispatched to Whispering Pines immediately. Yes, it's an emergency. I have a hostile, aggressive resident physically blocking a maintenance crew from performing a legally mandated extraction. He is threatening the workers. Send a cruiser now. She hung up the phone and glared at me with absolute venomous hatred. You are going to jail. You are actually going to sit in the back of a police car today. I looked at Brenda. Then I looked at Mike. I gave him a little, helpless shrug. Well, guess we're waiting for the cops, Mike, I said brightly. You guys want some water? Maybe some coffee? I have a fresh pot inside. It's pretty hot out here to just be standing around. I don't want your coffee, man, Mike muttered, setting the heavy chainsaw all the way down on the grass. He took a step backward, away from the tree. I just want to cut some wood and go home. It took exactly 12 minutes for the Cary Police Department to arrive. A heavy white and blue cruiser rolled up to the curb, its light bar flashing silently in the morning sun, reflecting off the windows of the massive yellow bucket truck. 2 officers stepped out, the heavy duty belts clinking around their waists. One was a younger guy, probably barely 22, who looked like he had just graduated from the police academy last week. He looked nervous. The other was a veteran officer in his late 40s. He had graying hair, a thick mustache, and the deep, exhausted look of a man who had completely run out of patience for suburban drama 3 decades ago. His name tag read, Davis. Brenda sprinted over to them before they even fully closed their car doors. Officers, thank God you're here, she yelled, practically grabbing Officer Davis by the sleeve and pointing dramatically at me like I was holding a live grenade. This man is completely unhinged. He is illegally blocking an HOA-mandated tree removal. We have all the proper notarized paperwork. I need him arrested immediately for trespassing on a shared utility easement and disturbing the peace. He threatened the contractors. Officer Davis sighed deeply. It was a long, slow exhale. He hooked his thumbs into his utility belt and walked slowly over to my lawn, his tired eyes scanning the scene. He looked at the massive commercial trucks, the bewildered tree crew standing around holding ropes, Brenda vibrating with rage, me standing calmly in the grass, and the giant oak tree towering over all of us. He had clearly dealt with 100 neighborhood disputes exactly like this one. He hated every second of it. All right, let's just bring the temperature down a few degrees, Officer Davis said, his voice flat, calm, and incredibly authoritative. He looked directly at me. Sir, I need to explain how this works. If the Homeowners Association has a valid, signed contract, and the neighborhood bylaws legally permit the removal of a tree that sits on a shared property line, you cannot physically stop the crew from doing their job. This is a civil issue, not a criminal one. You need to step away from the tree and let them work. If you don't, I'm going to have to write you a citation for obstruction, and we're going to have a very different conversation. Officer Davis, I said, keeping my voice completely level and respectful. I want to be very clear. I am not disputing the HOA bylaws. I know what the bylaws say. Davis blinked. Then what exactly is the problem here, sir? The problem, officer, I said slowly, is that I am disputing the HOA's legal authority to override the United States federal government. Officer Davis stared at me. The younger rookie officer blinked. Mike the foreman aggressively scratched his red beard. Brenda let out a loud, theatrical, mocking laugh. "He's insane," Brenda told the cops, gesturing wildly at my face. "Do you hear him? He's literally lost his mind. He thinks he's above the law." I slowly reached into the right pocket of my khaki shorts. "Keep your hands where I can see them," the rookie officer said sharply, his hand resting nervously on his radio. "Just pulling out my phone, officer," I said smoothly, holding the device up with 2 fingers. "I just want to show you a live video feed." I unlocked the screen, opened the Wise app, and made sure the screen brightness was turned all the way up to combat the morning glare. I walked slowly over to Officer Davis and held the phone up right in front of his face. "Officer Davis, just a quick question," I asked politely. "Are you familiar with Title 16 of the United States Code, sections 703 through 712? Davis squinted at the screen. He saw the grainy, greenish infrared night vision feed. He saw the rough-cut cedar walls of the interior of the box. And then he saw Liberty. The eastern screech owl was staring unblinkingly back at the camera, her massive, glowing yellow eyes burning through the screen. She looked incredibly pissed off. "Is that an owl?" Davis asked, his thick gray eyebrows furrowing in confusion. "That is a native, wild eastern screech owl," I said proudly. "Her name is Liberty. And right beneath her, if you look very closely at the bottom edge of her feathers on the screen, you will see 3 active, viable eggs. She is currently nesting in a federally compliant conservation cavity box that I mounted 20 feet up in this exact oak tree." I pulled the phone back, locked the screen, slid it back into my pocket, and looked Officer Davis dead in the eye. "Under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, it is a strict liability federal misdemeanor to pursue, hunt, take, capture, kill, or otherwise disturb any migratory bird, their nest, or their eggs without a federal permit. The legal penalty for disturbing this specific nest, or destroying the tree that holds it, is up to 6 months in federal prison and a $15,000 fine." I paused for dramatic effect, letting the silence hang in the humid air. Per egg. The silence on my front lawn was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. The only sound was the distant hum of a lawnmower a block over. Officer Davis looked from my face, up to the massive canopy of the oak tree, trying to spot the hidden box, and then over to Mike the foreman. Mike's eyes were completely wide behind his mirrored sunglasses. He looked down at the massive, heavy-duty chainsaw sitting on the grass near his boots, like it was an active ticking nuclear bomb. He took 3 very fast, very large, very deliberate steps backward away from the tree. "Nope," Mike said loudly, breaking the silence. "Absolutely not. Hell no. I ain't touching it. I got 2 kids and a 30-year mortgage, buddy. I am not going to federal lockup over an owl and some sidewalk leaves. Pack it up, boys. We're out of here. Load the trucks." "What?" Brenda shrieked. Her voice cracked so hard it went up a full octave. "Mike, you have a contract. I paid a $2,000 non-refundable deposit. You can't just leave." "Watch me, lady," Mike yelled back, grabbing his chainsaw by the handle and practically sprinting toward his heavy-duty pickup truck. "The contract is legally void if the required work involves committing an actual felony. Read the fine print on the back of the invoice. Have a nice life." The 3 other tree crew guys didn't hesitate. They started wildly throwing heavy rigging ropes, harnesses, and hard hats into the back of the trucks with frantic, panicked energy. One of them actually dropped a wrench on the street and didn't even bother to pick it up. Within 45 seconds, they had the doors slammed shut and the diesel engines roaring back to life. Brenda spun back to the police officers, her face turning a dangerous, mottled shade of deep magenta. She looked like she was about to have a stroke right there on the grass. "Officers!" Brenda screamed, pointing at me again. "Arrest him! He did this on purpose. He maliciously lured a dangerous, disease-carrying predator into a residential neighborhood. He built an illegal wooden structure in that tree without architectural committee approval. Officer Davis slowly reached up and pinched the bridge of his nose. He closed his eyes for a long second. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on planet Earth. He wanted to be writing parking tickets. He wanted to be directing traffic in a blizzard. "Ma'am," Officer Davis said, his voice dropping into a dull, exhausted monotone. "I am a local municipal police officer. I handle traffic stops, shoplifting, and domestic disputes. I do not handle federal bird law. If there is a federally protected species nesting up in that tree, my legal jurisdiction ends right at the edge of this sidewalk. I cannot authorize the removal of that tree, and I cannot arrest this man for building a birdhouse." "Then who handles it?" Brenda screamed, practically stomping her foot. "Who is in charge?" "I'll call the game warden," the younger rookie officer chimed in quietly, looking slightly terrified of Brenda. He was already reaching for the heavy radio mic clipped to his shoulder. And just like that, the local standoff was over. But the federal smackdown was just beginning. Honestly, I am just, genuinely impressed by how fast Mike grabbed his chainsaw and ran. Seeing the pure panic behind those mirrored sunglasses was literally a defining sovereign ruling moment. I mean, you just don't see that kind of survival instinct in suburban landscaping every day, I guess. Let's watch this whole thing finally implode. We waited on my front lawn for exactly 28 minutes. And let me tell you, it was the longest, most gloriously awkward 28 minutes of my entire life. The heavy, suffocating North Carolina heat was really starting to bake the asphalt. The tree crew was completely gone, having fled the scene like they were escaping a bank robbery. Officer Davis and the young rookie had retreated to the sliver of shade cast by my mailbox, leaning against the side of their white and blue police cruiser. Davis had actually taken off his uniform hat and was wiping a thick layer of sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief, staring blankly off into the middle distance. He looked like a man who was meticulously calculating the exact number of days he had left until his municipal pension kicked in. And then there was Brenda. Brenda did not stop moving. She paced back and forth across the exact boundary line of my property, her crisp white tennis shoes practically wearing a groove into the concrete sidewalk. She was aggressively stabbing at the screen of her cell phone, making frantic, hushed phone calls to what I could only assume were the other members of the Whispering Pines HOA executive board. "I don't care what the retainer fee is. Call the association's legal counsel," she hissed into the phone at one point, her voice carrying easily through the thick, humid air. "He put a birdhouse in the tree. Yes, a birdhouse. No, it's not a lawn ornament, it's in the tree. I need a court injunction, Susan. Call the lawyer right now." I just sat back down in my rocking chair on the porch, picked up my mug, and took another sip of my coffee. It had gone completely cold, but it tasted like absolute victory. I kept my phone open on my lap, occasionally glancing down at the Wise app. Liberty was still there, utterly unfazed by the chaos unfolding 20 feet below her, incubating those 3 beautiful, highly weaponized federal eggs. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a vehicle turned onto the cul-de-sac. It wasn't a white Lexus, and it wasn't a yellow cherry picker. It was a dark, forest green Dodge Ram 2500 pickup truck. It was covered in a light layer of dirt, like it had just driven out of a deep wooded trail. On the driver's side door, shining brilliantly in the morning sun, was the official gold and green circular seal of the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. The truck rumbled slowly down the street and parked directly behind the police cruiser, its heavy off-road tires crunching against the curb. The engine shut off. The heavy driver's side door swung open. Agent Miller stepped out onto the pavement. He was exactly what you would picture if you closed your eyes and imagined a guy whose entire job is enforcing the law in swamps and forests. He was easily 6'3", wearing a crisp, perfectly pressed khaki uniform shirt with patches on both shoulders, heavy olive green tactical cargo pants, and thick brown leather boots. He had a heavy utility belt that held a radio, a flashlight, and what looked like a canister of bear mace. Topping it all off was a wide-brimmed campaign hat and a pair of dark, polarized aviator sunglasses. He looked like he routinely wrestled alligators just to warm up for the day. Brenda naturally tried to intercept him before he even got both feet on the grass. "Excuse me, officer, agent!" she yelled, practically sprinting over to him with her silver clipboard raised like a shield. "I am the one who called. I am the president of the Homeowners Association. This man has illegally stalled a contracted, board-approved maintenance project by maliciously luring wild animals into a residential zone." Agent Miller didn't even break his stride. He completely ignored her. He walked right past her, leaving her standing there with her mouth open, and headed straight for Officer Davis. "Morning, Davis," Miller said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone. He shook the tired cop's hand. "Dispatch said you had a 1053 situation involving a protected species?" "Morning, Miller," Davis sighed, hooking his thumbs into his belt. He nodded toward my porch. "Guy up there says he's got a screech owl nesting in a box up in that oak tree. The HOA lady here was trying to have a commercial crew cut the whole thing down. The crew bolted the second they heard the words, 'federal prison.'" Miller let out a low, rumbling chuckle. "Smart crew. Where is the homeowner?" "Right here, Agent Miller," I called out, standing up from my rocking chair. I walked down the porch steps and met him halfway across the lawn. Miller stopped and looked down at me, pushing his aviator sunglasses slightly down the bridge of his nose so he could look me in the eye. "You the guy who called my office last week, asking all those highly specific, hypothetical questions about conservation boxes and HOA bylaws?" "That was me, sir," I said, offering a polite, completely innocent smile. "I took your advice. I wanted to do my part for the local ecosystem." "I bet you did," Miller said, a slight, knowing smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Let's see the proof, son. You got visuals on the nest? I'm not climbing 20 feet up a tree in this humidity unless I have to." "Absolutely," I said. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, unlocked it, and handed it directly to the game warden. Miller held the phone up, shielding the screen from the harsh sun with his large, calloused hand. He stared at the live feed for a long, quiet moment. He zoomed in slightly on the image. He looked at the rough-cut cedar walls. He looked at Liberty's massive, glowing yellow eyes. He looked at the 3 stark white eggs barely visible beneath her feathers. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "Well, I'll be absolutely damned," Miller muttered softly. He handed the phone back to me and nodded with genuine professional respect. "That is a beautiful setup you built for them, buddy. Textbook execution, and she is firmly established. 3 eggs, healthy-looking female." "Thank you, Agent Miller," I said, putting the phone back in my pocket. "Rough-cut cedar, just like you suggested." Brenda could not take it anymore. The lack of attention was physically destroying her. She stomped over, her face a terrifying shade of mottled crimson, and aggressively inserted herself right between me and the game warden. "Excuse me," Brenda shrieked, slamming her hand against her clipboard. "Are you going to arrest him or not? He purposely built that illegal wooden structure without submitting a single architectural review form. He baited that dangerous disease-carrying predator onto this property specifically to spite the HOA. That tree drops an unacceptable amount of leaves on our sidewalk. It has to come down today. The aesthetic integrity of this entire subdivision is at stake." Agent Miller slowly turned his head to look at Brenda. He didn't look amused anymore. The playful, respectful demeanor he had with me completely vanished. He suddenly looked very, very official. He looked like the full, uncompromising weight of the United States federal government. He reached into the breast pocket of his khaki shirt and pulled out a small, green, weatherproof notebook and a black pen. He clicked the pen with a sharp, loud snap. "Ma'am, who exactly is in charge of this tree removal operation?" Miller asked, his voice dropping into a cold, hard, authoritative rumble that commanded absolute silence. "I am," Brenda declared proudly, puffing out her chest and lifting her chin. "I am the elected president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. I authorized the funds. I signed the contract with Timber Right." "Well, Madam President," Miller said, writing something down in his little green notebook. "I am officially notifying you in front of these two sworn police officers as witnesses that the 80-year-old oak tree on this property line is now legally classified as an active, protected federal wildlife sanctuary under the direct authority of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service." Brenda's jaw literally dropped open. Her eyes darted around frantically, like she was looking for a hidden camera. You can't do that. You can't just declare a tree a sanctuary. It's on a shared utility easement. We have community bylaws." "I don't have to do it, ma'am. The federal government already did," Miller said, his voice completely devoid of sympathy. He pointed a thick finger directly at her clipboard. "Your local bylaws are superseded by Title 16 of the United States Code. Now, I am going to explain the legal concept of harassment to you under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and I strongly suggest you listen very closely because I am only going to say this once." Brenda tried to interrupt. "But the leaves—" "Quiet," Miller barked. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Brenda snapped her mouth shut, her eyes wide with shock. No one in this neighborhood had ever spoken to her like that. "If your tree crew comes back," Miller continued, stepping slightly closer to her, towering over her by 1.5 feet. "If they turn on a wood chipper on this street, if they fire up a chainsaw anywhere within 50 yards of that tree, hell, ma'am, if you hire a guy to run a loud gas-powered leaf blower too close to those lower branches, the noise and vibrations will cause undue stress to that nesting mother. Under federal law, that is legally defined as harassment of a protected species." He leaned in even closer. I could practically feel the terrifying bureaucratic aura radiating off of him. "If that bird gets spooked and abandons her nest because of your HOA landscaping activities," Miller said, his voice dangerously low, "I will personally return to this neighborhood with a stack of federal warrants. I will cite the commercial tree company. I will formally cite the entire HOA executive board, and I will cite you personally as the authorizing agent. The fines will be $15,000 per abandoned egg. That is $45,000. It will completely bankrupt your little homeowners association, and you will be answering to a federal judge in a United States District Court. Do I make myself perfectly clear, ma'am?" I actually thought Brenda was going to spontaneously combust right there on the grass. I have never, in my entire life, seen a human being cycle through so many intense emotions in such a short amount of time. Her face went from that deep crimson to a stark, terrifying, bloodless white, and finally settled on a deep, blotchy, hyperventilating purple. Her mouth opened and closed 3 or 4 times, like a fish out of water, but absolutely no sound came out. She looked at Agent Miller's unblinking aviator sunglasses. She looked at Officer Davis, who was actively hiding a massive smirk behind his hand. She looked down at the street, where the tree crew's trucks had been parked just 20 minutes ago. Finally, she slowly turned her head and looked at me. If looks could legally commit murder, I would have been instantly sliced into 1,000 tiny ribbons, set on fire, and fed directly to the owls. The sheer, concentrated venom in her eyes was almost radioactive. But she didn't say a single word. She knew she was beaten. You can argue with a neighbor. You can argue with a landscaper. You cannot argue with a guy wearing a badge who is threatening to hit you with $45,000 in federal fines. Brenda spun around so fast she nearly tripped over her own pristine white tennis shoes. She marched back to her Lexus, her posture rigid and shaking with suppressed rage. She didn't walk. She stomped. She yanked the heavy car door open, threw her silver clipboard violently into the passenger seat, and climbed inside. She slammed the door so incredibly hard the entire SUV's suspension actually bounced. The engine roared to life. She threw the car into drive, slammed her foot on the gas, and peeled out of the cul-de-sac, completely ignoring the neighborhood's strict 15-mile-per-hour speed limit. We watched her taillights disappear around the corner. Agent Miller chuckled quietly, shaking his head. He clicked his pen shut and slid the green notebook back into his pocket. I love this job, Miller muttered to himself. He turned to the two police officers. Thanks for the backup, boys. I think we're all clear here. Anytime, Miller, Officer Davis said, clearly relieved that he didn't have to write a single piece of paperwork. Have a good one. The two cops climbed back into their cruiser, turned off the silent flashing light bar, and drove away, leaving me and the game warden alone on the front lawn. The heavy, oppressive silence of the humid morning rushed back in to fill the void. High above us, hidden completely from view by the dense green canopy of leaves, Liberty was still sitting in the dark, entirely unaware of the absolute legal warfare that had just been waged on her behalf. Agent Miller reached up and adjusted the brim of his campaign hat. He looked at me, a serious, respectful expression on his face. You keep an eye on those eggs, son, Miller said. Incubation for a screech owl is usually around 26 to 30 days. Once they hatch, the male is going to be working overtime bringing food back to the box. It's going to get messy, but they are incredible birds. You enjoy the show. I will, Agent Miller, I said, reaching out to shake his massive hand. Thank you, seriously. You literally saved my tree. No, buddy, Miller said, pointing a finger at my chest. You saved your tree. You just used the right tool for the job. You have a good weekend. He turned, walked back to his heavy green Dodge Ram, climbed inside, and drove off down the street. I was officially alone. I stood on my front lawn in the sweltering heat for a long time. I looked down at the empty concrete sidewalk, completely devoid of leaves. Then I tilted my head back and looked up at the towering 80-year-old oak tree. The metal predator guard that Tony had installed glinted brightly in the rising morning sun. The branches swayed gently, casting that glorious, cooling shade over the front of my house. The tree wasn't going anywhere. It was protected. It was safe. And as long as those owls kept coming back every spring, and trust me, I was going to make sure that Cedar Box was a 5-star luxury resort every single year, Brenda would never, ever be able to touch it. I walked slowly back up the porch steps, sat down in my rocking chair, and picked up my cold mug of coffee. I guess the ultimate moral of this story is pretty simple, folks. When the neighborhood dictator tries to use their little laminated clipboard and a stack of hyper-specific local bylaws to destroy your property over a plastic $20 bird feeder, you don't get mad. You don't throw a fit. You don't yell. You just dig a little deeper, read a little further, and find a law that they literally cannot argue with. Because at the end of the day, a petty HOA board might think they own the neighborhood, but they don't own the sky. Never bring a neighborhood clipboard to a federal wildlife fight. Honestly, they never stand a chance.